So without further ado, every single day I have the opportunity to be humbled. Every day I have the opportunity to meet leaders and creative geniuses in the tiny house community. Some of us have only been around the tiny house community for a couple of years, but there are a few that have been around since, I would guess, 95% of you even heard of a tiny house. These are what we call the luminaries. These are what we call the mother, the father, the grandfather of the tiny house movement. They have been writing books and walking the walk and talking the talk and being minimalists and talking about making ways to sustain our planet for longer than any of us have ever heard of them. And our next guest is one of those people. A long time ago, he decided to buck the system. He wanted to build a house, but he wanted to take his house with him. He didn't want to invest all that money and put it in a house and put it on a foundation. So please join me in a very, very welcoming round of applause for my friend now, Jay Shafer.
Oh, thank you for being here. I look out here and I actually feel like I could just stand here, actually, and it'd be all for me. It's like, can't you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah. I did the same thing last year, except for I did it for half the entire presentation, so thanks for letting me know early this time. I am so happy to be here. This is like my new favorite holiday, this weekend of the year, like tiny weekend of the year, you know? It's like when I get to actually visit my real family. That's what it feels like. People come up to me and they apologize. They're like, I'm sorry, but can I get your autograph? And I'm like, oh my God, can I get yours? Because that's really cool. It make me feel like a rock star, thank you. I'm here to talk about, allegedly, the tiny house movement, its evolution, and from an insider's perspective. Unfortunately, I wasn't there back in the old days, which means, I guess, forever tiny houses have existed. You know, settlers' cabins, hippie shacks, way back to, you know, I actually was very inspired by a Japanese hotel room. The bathroom in particular, I spent my entire Japanese vacation, almost all of it, sitting there in the hotel room inspired by this tiny bathroom, and that was when I was like, oh my gosh, we should do this in the States. And now Japan's totally into tiny houses, which is weird because they were already doing it.
I know.
But I'm nonetheless inspired by the fact that this has become an international thing. And they're like, oh my gosh, you look out there and I can't, it's very abstract to me actually. Because I used to feel like I had a handle on this thing, like I could actually sort of direct a message. And at a certain point, that certainly is not the case. And it's got a life of its own, and it's very exciting to see. I guess I could start, since it is the part I know most about, with my own personal experience with tiny houses. Back in 97 or so, 1997, I bought an Airstream trailer, and I've been thinking about building a little structure on the back of my pickup truck, since I've been living back there for a few months anyway. But when I started looking at all the RV stuff, I was like, oh, I could just buy an RV, because these old used things are really cheap. And so, you know, for $2,000, I got myself a house, another $500 in repairs, and I was good to go. But turns out RVs are called RVs for a reason. I guess the R part is for recreational. There's not much insulation in a seasonal vehicle. And by law, RVs are supposed to be designed for seasonal use only. Although I don't know what that means, because I designed my first house on wheels that I built for seasonal use in winter only, because I was actually staying out on Long Island during the summers. So things have evolved a lot. You know, used to be that if, you know, I called my first house tiny house company a company because when I was thinking about small house company, I found a magazine like small house plans of 1,500 to 2,500 square feet. I was like, well, I guess I can't use that word anymore. and for that matter, Lester Walker's Tiny House book, The Tiny Houses, was very inspirational to me. So I guess we should all tip our hats to Les Walker and all the others who have always been pushing this stuff. I think the primary thing I did, the idea came to me at a very opportune time because, well, it was kind of obvious actually. I think when the only option is a McMansion, and it's like, that's all you can buy now, that's all we got. I guess it's time for an option, and I needed a home. So the tiny house thing for me was born largely, almost entirely out of necessity. I just didn't want to live, I wanted to live well. I really don't need much more than this much space at a time anyway. The rest is perception, so I figured I'd build myself a very nice little house. Take my art degree and use some of that sacred geometry I'd learned about and actually put it to use for once. You know, it was good for the grocery store job for a while, but I figured it was time to actually build something. I'm a meaning addict, so everything has to have meaning. If it doesn't have meaning, I'll ascribe meaning to it. And in the case of a tiny house, you know, my first house was very house-like, very homey in its form, because I love that sense of home, and all those archetypal forms that we associate with home were very important to me. I should make a point now that we don't all have to put a gable on the top of a roof to call it a tiny house. We don't have to do anything to call anything a home, besides call it our home and feel like it is our home. I've called a lot of places home, actually, and it turns out that any of you who are woo-woo enough to know what I mean when I talk about chakras, and that I essentially started my spiritual journey from my 7th chakra without any foundation. But I'm very good at intellectualizing and talking about a sense of home and designing a sense of home, probably because I think I never really had a true sense of home, and so that, you know, that kind of thing results in some gifts, which would be like at least talking about presenting a sense of home. And in this last couple of years or so, I've been realizing that the true sense of home is, you know, of course, like everything else, inside. And I've been finding that more and more. And I find a lot of it here, frankly. It's not like I walk down the street every day and I get people asking for my autograph, by the way. I come here and I get, can you hear me?
You want to switch mics?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Here.
Now you can hear me. I think I'm good. Anyway, I come here and I get a sense of home, the community. Frankly, ever since I decided to design myself a house, well, you know, when I moved into the Airstream, my theme song for that build was Major Tom. I was very isolated. Here am I floating in my tin can all by myself, out in the middle of this hayfield. That was kind of my ideal at the time, but I realized after that I had to make that next build of the tiny house up from scratch as much a community thing as possible. So, you know, I'd go in and buy my roofing material and get the guys involved and everybody was so excited. And since that time, I've always known that community is a big part of a sense of home for me. Even if my home is designed for one person, or even 2 people or 3, this support system, I'm kind of introverted, but I need to know people have got my back while I'm, so once I'm emerging from my little house, I know that my back is covered and that it's very important to me. And to look out in here and I have no idea what I had no idea what I was gonna talk. I just told Ariel this morning, and others. Others might ride the camels, thank you. I have so many things, I'm not even gonna start with that. Thanks to every single person here. But the community thing is just so vital. It just seems so obvious. You know, whenever I find myself saying to myself, if I were you, and I am, somebody ought to do this. Somebody ought to do blah, blah, blah. Somebody ought to build a tinier house. I know that's probably a good opportunity to say, oh, I should maybe build a tiny house. Certainly, the things that come to mind that are lacking in our culture are that simplicity that goes along with our humanity that that most of us here, those of us who weren't dragged here, have been largely striving for. And also a sense of community that goes along with that. Autonomy and community, because you can't really have one without the other, I feel. Self-reliance, Henry Thoreau, one of our predecessors in the tiny house movement about a couple 100 years ago, spoke of self-reliance, and there's something to that. But doing everything yourself is not necessarily the way we're built as a species. We're a bit of a herd animal, and I guess that doesn't sound very good in a culture where America's very, we play up the independence thing a lot. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me. I need a lot of help in the areas where I don't do well. And I know that not all of you out there are good at everything. So, I probably don't even have to talk about this because everything I say seems obvious. To me, everything I say seems obvious. I probably should just start the presentation with, tiny houses are more efficient. The end. Because efficient really means sustainable, well-designed, not arbitrary is well-designed, that's efficient. Paring it down, subtractive design is design when it comes to everything from computer design to, everything, except for American housing in the last few decades. And thank goodness that is changing. I've seen some great designs come out. And that is amazing, because this whole innovation in efficient design stuff, it just has been paralleling the tiny house thing. I don't know which comes first, the chicken or the egg or the horse or the cart. But things are getting a little smaller and easier, and I know when I first moved into my tiny house in a hayfield, there was this big box thing called a cell phone. And people would look at you funny like you're hoity-toity and trying to act all hot if you got your cell phone at the video store and it goes off. They're like, oh, he must be thinking he's hot. Yeah, excuse me. But, of course I'm thinking, yeah, right, I poop in a bucket, It's low-tech, high-tech, whatever it takes to survive. But I don't think any extra gadgetry, all the extra gadgetry is just, if it ain't working for you, really, is working against you. So the simplicity thing, love those, I actually told the guys I did not get paid to say this, but the guys who were making the little chair that spreads out from the book-like thing, it's like, that's the tiny house movement right there. That's the kind of thing I'm like, oh, Pinterest, put that on the page right there. Just simplicity. It's like, oh, and you know how I design? I spent 4 months making this hinged table that turns from the coffee table into the dining table, into a multifunctional thing, and then several months later I realized, oh, I could have just turned a table on its side, and then it would have changed the function right there, and that's what I finally arrived at. So when I got up here today, I could go on and on about the evolution of the movement. It seems pretty obvious to me. I really love how well it is. It's just unfolding. I think it's just beginning. Every year, somebody says, oh, this thing's got to be about ready to burn out. It's just reached its peak. I remember like 10 years somebody saying, oh, now that Oprah's done something on it, it's jumped a shark, it's ready to take a dive, and that was just that's the tip of the iceberg, and every year it's huge. Look at this, jeez. And so the evolution is still unfolding. It's following necessity's lead, and regardless of any laws, zoning, codes, whatever, funny thing is, the codes and the zoning are actually evolving. We're actually making a difference. It's pretty freaking crazy. For one thing, if you pretend like you know what you're talking about when you write about codes and zoning and what's supposed to, if you just say, yeah, it's supposed to be this way, they actually believe you. It's really weird. And then beyond that, that's kind of because we all want to believe it. It's not like every person in the zoning office wants to live in a McMansion or doesn't see the common sense in all of this. And there's a new breed of official who, we're atoning for the sins of our foremothers and forefathers at this point, And the folks in the zoning and code departments are having to work double time at that. They're like, sorry about the big mess here, suburban sprawl, blah, blah, blah. But we're working on it. And it's a slow process, but it's happening. Now, what I really want to do today, and what I plan to do from the very beginning, is answer any questions. Questions and answers are my favorite part. Better to do the dialogue than the monologue as far as I'm concerned, because I know there are a lot of questions out there. Everything seems like common sense to me. Even if I don't know the answer to something, I can make it up. But I'd love to know if there's any concern, any question. It could be related to tiny houses, preferably so at this point. But I want to ask you guys if there's anything you want to know about the evolution or anything relating to tiny houses, because there are apparently a lot of questions out there, I find. Yeah.
I have a phrase that I want you to comment on. You probably heard the phrase "small is beautiful" from E.F. Schumacher, and you made small beautiful for tiny houses and got it accepted. So my phrase is, if you're going to be small, you have to be beautiful. Could you comment on that?
Thank you. I agree with that. Yeah, if you're gonna be small, you have to be beautiful. I agree. I mean, I really think if this is gonna be replicated, it's gotta be. If it's gonna be contagious, we gotta have the eye candy. That really helps. I chose a message. I love a message and a megaphone. And I would hate to have one but not the other. That would suck. But eye candy goes it turns out goes a long way. So this tiny house, I think the tiny house movement is kind of like it's very much the Occupy movement, but without all the tear gas. And it's really like cozy. Because it's really the same message. We're doing the same thing. And I prefer the just living it part. And I have a lot of activist friends who will go out and get sprayed with tear gas. I tried to tow a tiny house into Wall Street area, didn't quite make it in, but during the whole Occupy thing when it was really strong, and regardless of whether I made it in or not, doesn't matter, because it's actually happening in this I call the tiny house movement the tiny Trojan horse with curb appeal. Because we're kind of like sneaking in the message every time there's another article on this cute little thing. But it's like the cute little thing is hiding this giant message that's not so hidden, I love it. But yes, it has to be beautiful, because I think, why not? I do get a little frustrated. I'm like, well, it's frustrating to see a house built where somebody didn't spend any time on the design process, I think. For me anyway, because I'm a design geek. It's even more frustrating when they build something big that's ugly. I'm like, couldn't you at least put a couple hours into that part before building that? But yeah, thank you. Yes, sorry.
How's the Napoleon complex coming along?
Oh my gosh, my life has gotten in the way, and it's somewhat embarrassing that Napoleon complex is the working title for the village, the community that I dream of, with pedestrian walkways, parking out back so it's human scale. Keeping everything, basically, I've never done anything new. I just copy all the best ideas I can find. I guess once you plagiarize 100 people within one work, it's no longer plagiarism. You just stick wheels on something and, oh, that's a trailer, actually. They've done that, but there you go, just combine it all. But to your point, life has gotten in the way. My life is pretty freaking chaotic lately, so I haven't had time to break ground, but there are just in my county alone, there are about 5 fronts of people working on trying to build tiny house villages. And a few of the projects have been okayed. And it's not thanks to me. I occasionally show up here and there to be a figurehead face thing. But thank God other people are doing it. And thank God, we're seeing them happen. Of course, I'm always thinking, but I gotta see my village, because I have these ideas of traditional proportioning and what goes into a community to make it cohesive but also private for people. But it's happening. Thank you. That's my excuse. Yes.
I have a question. So, I think I struggle morally with being
watch those shows, or we've seen the shows, and I just, which also I'm grateful for because it puts it out there.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if you have any comments or anyone else. What would be an easy, quick thing to say to that? An easy response that gives more to the movement?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question, or would you like me to?
Could you?
Yes.
Thank you, Michelle. I should acknowledge Michelle's on the stage now, so I should make use of her. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. So the question was, she struggles morally with the tiny house movement because it's become such a trend, but at the same time she's very thankful because without the popularity she would have never learned about it. So oftentimes her friends will say something like, oh yeah, I saw those on the TV. And again, it's sort of a double-edged sword, like, yeah, but the tiny house movement really isn't about the TV. So the crux of the question is, did Jay have a witty statement or sentence or reply to the people that say things like, oh, I saw those on TV, they're so cute. Did I do that accurately?
Good job.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now to repeat again. No, I won't repeat again. I like to think of the overproduction and overhousing as the trend. It's been a pretty long trend of decades, but it's not sustainable. So, and I'm not thinking like everybody's going to move into a 100 square foot house on wheels. My definition of tiny house, I've always been really careful about this, but a tiny house is just any house in which all the space is used well and the occupant's needs are covered. So there's no argument. I never have to argue with anyone. It's great. If they try to argue, they look like an idiot. So back to Thoreau, he would say, don't, the civil disobedience doesn't involve going against the trend or the man or any. I have trouble remembering this actually, apparently, but just doing what you know is right, regardless of the trend or whatever anybody else is doing, you just do it. And so this is, it doesn't have to be on wheels, but it can be. There's no reason not to do it just because everybody else. In high school, I was like the anti-popular music guy, but I was going for the Sex Pistols, which are very popular, of course. And like I had the different hair, the mohawk, but everybody else had the mohawk. So you gotta get past the trending, of course. We know that. It doesn't matter. And what's being said on TV, I haven't actually watched the shows. I'm sure I hear other people who are so overwhelmed by this whole thing. I used to keep up with it, now, or actually kind of guide it. Now I'm just like, whoa. And I'm just so happy there are people of integrity and still at the forefront of this thing. And Zach from the TV show. I haven't seen the TV show, but I've met Zach a few times, and that's a man of integrity who's authentic. I don't know what they let him say on the show, or I don't care, because when he gets on this microphone, he's out there, dude, and I love that. And I love the fact that he also gave me a lot of kudos, so I feel like I'm paying him back right now, Zach. Oh, he's not here anymore. Okay, never mind then. Oh, he's so cool. Thank you.
Okay, I know this is kind of a weird question, but I have to ask. So I'm single, I'm doing my research, trying to design, and if I don't get married, I'm trying to adopt, but if I happen to get married, I'm just trying to think of the logistical aspect of intimacy when you have a child. Like, how do you, like, decide a match for that?
They talked about that yesterday.
Oh, they did? Oh, I had to leave, so, okay.
Oh yeah, it's a good top. It's a great topic.
Would you like to paraphrase the question, or would you like me to?
You know the answer to that is always going to be you, please.
He asked me to help. Just so you know, he asked me to help, so this is me helping. So the question is, she's single, and she's currently designing her house. And even if she doesn't find Mr. Right, she's going to plan on adopting. But then what happens when you do find Mr. Right? What are the logistics, what are the considerations that you take into account as your life sort of progresses? You design your house based on your current existing position, but then what happens when stuff changes and when you have other people to share your space with? Did I get that right?
Yes, and the intimacy part.
Oh, the question about sex in tiny houses.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that?
You're talking to the right guy. Because I am OCD enough to, I'm starting to say on my designs, OCD certified. Because, I have to consider everything. And just like every religious text has a little section where it's like, oh yes, body functions. The Bible's like, man must go with a stick out to the woods and blah, blah, blah. I really consider the small house thing to be very spiritual for me. I consider it a subtractive process of looking at self. It's kind of like a mandala thing. And I remember the day I was like, well, what do I do in bed? When I sleep, that's pretty easy to accommodate for. But then I had to figure out like favorite positions and stuff. So you got like measure, like, can I fit into this table? And how tall is this table? Can my loft be this high? That sort of thing. It happens. You better do it, or else you're going to wind up with the monastic lifestyle I had when I lived in my Airstream and didn't plan for such things. Intimacy is very important. It's one of those things that's lacking in our culture. We only find it mostly through sex, which I love. I love sex, but it's so nice to have intimacy everywhere. Oh, thanks. You were my favorite snuggler last night, by the way. There were people snuggling all over the place. That's what we do in California, by the way. I have a sense it's the same here. We have these hippies going around like doing ecstatic dance and contact dancing, puppy pile.
We have those in Portland too.
Do you?
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. I know you probably got to have them here too.
Here's a practical tip: get really good stabilizer jacks, and it won't rock so much.
Thank you.
So what he said was get really good stabilizer jacks and it won't move so much. So that was his short answer.
It's better than my long answer. My long answer is make it flexible. Oh, that's the short answer behind my long answer, is make it flexible. Because if you can expand it, even if it's 2 houses or 3 houses and somehow they can work in conjunction, then you have that flexibility. But you shouldn't have to build for 4 people if you're only 1 person right now.
Right. I was just trying to figure out how, okay, baby, go play outside for 7 hours.
Mhm.
Like, you know what I mean?
She said, so what do? Do you just send your kids outside for 7 hours? Did you say 7 hours? My response to that is, it's a brand new definition of the term playdate. Next question.
That would be community, yeah.
Over here in the pink tank top.
That is my favorite design of my own right now. I still haven't released it.
So the question is,
please.
the question is, she loves his U-line design. Where is that in the development process?
The U-House is actually fully designed now, and I'm very happy with it. It's my favorite design because it's flexible. You can expand it it's like Lego meets IKEA and they make a porn movie together. But it's sitting there on my laptop because I haven't had the resources to release it. It's like I'm without a crew right now, and I can't answer all the email questions that would come in. It feels like intellectual constipation, holding on to something I believe could change the world. And I'm just like, Jesus, I got to do a Kickstarter. But that U-House is, I must say, it's awesome because you can build outward with these I call them outies. Or you can keep it small by putting in the innies, the bathroom kitchen that fit inside the 200 square foot shell core on wheels. That can also be on a foundation. It's very flexible.
Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions. Right here in front in the dark red shirt. Yes, that's you. She's asked him to repeat his very pithy quote about his definition of a tiny house.
Oh yeah, I've always been, I was warned by smarter people than I early on in this movement when we're starting the small house society. Shay Solomon's like, let's not put a fine point on this. Don't be exclusive. A small house is any house in which all the space is used well and all the needs of the occupant are met. I change the quote every time I say it, so you can write whatever you want, and I probably said it that way.
Yes, in the straw hat.
Oh my gosh, you're one of me.
Oh, it's true. One of my favorite quotes from the podcast. So she asked him to comment further about the term sacred geometry. I'm gonna probably go sit down because this is gonna be a 20-minute answer, huh?
I'll try to keep it brief because from teaching workshops, I know that like 1 in 100 of us actually get into this stuff. So this is just between you and me, probably, maybe 1 or 2 other people. But as a meaning addict, you know, like I just have to have meaning in everything. I figure like bad design, which is to say not design, is when you do stuff that's arbitrary. You got to have a reason to do everything. So where I can't find reason, like the size of something compared to something else, proportioning, I look to sacred geometry. And by the way, there is no other secret form of geometry. Geometry is geometry. You know, nature's nature. But they call it sacred geometry when you start ascribing meaning to the forms and the numbers and the proportions that are involved. So that's a tradition that, and it's interesting that those things happen in every culture, and it's always the same meaning for the same numbers and the same shapes. And when you look at the nature of the geometry, you can see why. Like, of course, number 1 is the divine, the singular, and it goes on from there, you know, point without dimension, blah, blah, blah. That's all I can say, because otherwise we could just go. I did do a design geek, a couple friends of mine who I now have here. Let's talk later. Because I love geeking out on that stuff.
I just did a time check. We will take 2 more questions from the audience, and then I have a couple. Pink umbrella?
Yeah.
She discovered tumbleweed tiny houses when they were featured on Oprah, and she was actually quite enamored by the small house plans. So she wants to know what happened to the small house plans. Are you still designing them and promoting them?
Yeah, when I split with Tumbleweed, and I guess I'm trying to start calling my new company, my newish 4-year-old company, Shafer's Tiny House Company, instead of 4 Lights, because I'm tired of explaining the 4 Lights thing. Oh, good. I'll keep doing that then. Shafer's Tiny House Company, ladies and gentlemen. Shafer. When I split with Tumbleweed, I left the company with a lot of my old plans, and so I don't know what's going on with those. But of course, I'm always just redesigning my first house, and I'm saying, what if a family lived here, or what if I could refine it and get rid of this inch, or add any? So I actually do have plans for a small house. Unfortunately, they're the ones that are sitting on my laptop. In fact, I have my 3 favorite ever tiny house designs sitting on my laptop, unreleased at this point. I gotta do the Kickstarter. You guys gotta, yeah, please, whatever it takes, you know. I should be more money-minded, but frankly, I gotta just get that stuff out. But I do have small. I think you're gonna love it. Talk to me later. Maybe I can show you the laptop pictures. Now I've opened that can of worms. Yeah.
Indeed, you have. Another question from the audience? Yes, in brown hat. She said that she believes that all meaning points to God, and so she would like Jay to comment on whether or not his spirituality or his beliefs are reflective in his design.
Totally. You know, my beliefs are very strong, but I'm very secular at the same time. In art school, I made up my own religion, where nature was goddess and society is God, and God gives us the words for conscious thought, the God and the nature. You know. It was great. Satan was the unfettered self. It was all metaphorical in a sense and just derived from other traditions, basically all traditions. And in that, you know, beyond, there's one universal thing that I've always been interested in, and that's the variations on the second commandment. You know, the commandment that we never actually follow as a culture in general. Thou shalt not create graven images, which means finite images. In Buddhism, that translates to, if you see the Buddha walking down the street, kill him. Because if your idea of divinity has become that finite, that definable, you got to transcend your idea of God to get to the actual God thing. And that's why in certain religions, well, they don't do any imagery at all because it's too left brain and it makes it hard to get to that the spiritual side. And that's where I started getting into tiny houses in art school, was when I started getting abstract art, just proportion and stuff, away from the pictures of mostly naked ladies, because that's what we did in drawing class. That's a fun subject too, but I wanted to get into the more abstract elements, like the rarefied art. And that's what turned into little shrines, and that's what turned into tiny houses from there. So I've always just been designing these little shrines because I got tired of storing the shrines that I couldn't live in. That's a good question. Thank you.
So I have a couple of questions for you. My first question is, going back to the theme of tiny house evolution, are you at all surprised by the size, the breadth, the width, the popularity of tiny houses? Is this of course that was going to happen, or are you surprised by that?
It's weird. I'm not alone in, like, you kind of get this sense of a premonition or an intention, and then you sort of push things in that direction. You don't know what's going to happen. But I did at a young age think, I would like to be famous in the way that some artists are, where you're not swamped like Brad Pitt walking out of his house or something, but you can pull out, oh, I'm the tiny house guy. I'm Picasso, whatever. I guess Picasso probably would get swamped. But I did not know what direction that would take, or if it was really real. I just knew that I like the idea of having a message. Because I am a meaning addict, I like to have meaning in my life. And while I have learned that the real meaningful stuff is the daily, like opening the door for somebody or smiling and yada yada, the simple acts of kindness that largely go unrecorded. Still, I can't help but love the, you've changed my life. I'm like, wow, all I had to do is build my own house. That's great, awesome. It gives me a sense of purpose. Thank you.
So you've mentioned Thoreau and you've mentioned Lester Walker as inspirational figures. Do you have any other inspirational figures or any modern day designers or inspiring people in the tiny house movement?
The most inspirational people to me have been now I realize why it always sounds corny when people answer questions like this on stage. Because, well, it's true that people like, God, D. Williams, Deke, now I'm a big fan of Zach since he stroked my ego and all that. And then people will approach me at this thing who I don't even know, and then I'm like, oh God, I love you for loving me. Maybe I'm just totally codependent. I don't know, but I know that I have. Most of my inspiration these days comes from people who know how to get out of their own way. The God thing, letting the higher power, whatever that is for you, do the work. I've always believed that my design is a result of a higher power. If I can get my ego out of the way, that unfettered part of it anyway, that's how I design houses. I don't design houses, I just get out of the way. And I'm just learning how to do that with the rest of my life. It's like, oh my gosh, I thought I had it down, but I'd only touched on the design part. And I see people who can do that. You see them here. I'm thinking of D, I'm thinking of BA. A lot of the people who cry on stage, those are my, I can trust. I can usually, unless they're a really high-functioning psycho who knows the cheer mechanism, those are the people I'm inspired by.
Is it ironic that he probably has no idea about what happened yesterday?
Oh, yesterday with the...
When I cried on stage.
Oh, yeah, I did hear about that, and so thank you. I do have faith in you now. Now I trust. I can trust you only if you cry on stage. In general, you can cry, or you're a complete asshole to me, because I trust people who are up front. Confrontation is a big part of. Why don't we have basic communication classes at like kindergarten age? I don't get it, but I didn't start learning how to really communicate on a real deeper level until I was like 45. I don't know, well into the tiny house thing. Good thing I can at least write to sound like I know what I'm talking about, huh?
Many of the people that are attending this weekend are actually starting their tiny house journey. Do you have any advice for them?
Good luck. No. Good luck, yes, actually. And, this is a good question because it's very, it's ready, aim, fire, not ready, fire, aim. So set your intention. Hardest part is identifying your true needs. Once you do that, that takes a while. I'm doing that again. You have to do it every once in a while. Marie cleaning house. Once you do that though, and you can design to fit those needs and not much more, I mean, you might want to consider if you want friends, you might want to, like my first bed was this wide. That restricted my social life very much. But you consider that stuff. Also, be careful. This is important to me. Once something goes on the internet, it doesn't make it necessarily true. There's a lot of information out there on, well, this is how you build a tiny house, and we know because we're famous. That's not necessarily the case. I built my first tiny house 16 years ago, whatever that was. And I've learned a lot since then, and there are a lot of people, I mean, the biggest source of misinformation I know is my old stuff. So if you're looking at that, talk to me. And look at my 10, which I only got through 8 or 6, but biggest mistakes. It's I think they call it, blog entries are called, "Don't try this on home." But there's a lot of, most of it's commonsensical, but there are a few things you should know. Don't put the metal joists, if you can help. If you've already done this, I'm sorry. You're fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. But don't put the metal joists, use the metal ribs of the trailer as your floor joists. Put insulation over that. At least 3 R's worth, like a couple inches, an inch, whatever. So you don't get thermal bridging where you see the ice forming, like the ribs of a whale that you're inside. I've actually made that mistake myself, so I know, in the Airstream mostly. So, just stuff like that. Just listen to me, just the new me.
Last question. So how can we reach you? How can we support you, and what's next?
Well, if there's a lawyer out there, I'd really love to talk to you. No, I'm, the way to support me, thank you for that. I guess I could plug my website since so many people have a hard time finding me. It's funny, my identity started getting pirated a bit when the tiny house thing went huge. So I'll find articles written by Shafer that I have nothing to do with. So you'll know if it's me. Well, I don't know if you'll know. I don't even know if it's me anymore. But if it's at fourlightshouses.com, it's me. It's me. And if it's in my small house book, which I didn't bring any of, duh. Well, I'm having trouble getting them out of the Amazon. I'm having trouble finding them at Amazon. Buy my book at Amazon, please. The Small House book is it is a really good book. I made that was my baby. I actually did all the pictures. It's called the, I guess we call it, or maybe we quoted some media source, the book that started a revolution. And it's lots of good eye candy, if nothing else. I don't read myself, but I did write the book, and it's a good book, so buy it. And yeah, the website is FOURLIGHTS houses.com. Oh, they're my Design Geek friends. My new friends, yes, thank you.
And the name of your book is what?
The Small House Book. And right now, you can only get it on Amazon. Like, I have 3 copies left in my house to give away.
That's funny. I have 3 copies too.
Oh, good. But go through Amazon, go through my website. That's better. Whatever. Just find it and buy it, because it's hard to find. It's been hard to find me, which means it's been hard to support myself in the last couple of years, frankly. Financially, I mean, I am totally successful in what I set out to do, which is get out a message. But I'm like, oh yeah, I should make some money along the way too, to sustain this whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jay, for your time and for your inspiration. And please join me in welcoming or thanking Jay Shafer.